So today we're going to talk about something really heavy. It's one of the most infamous and, frankly, disturbing episodes in the history of medical research. And it's a story that, even decades later, casts a long shadow over our ideas about ethics, trust, and science itself. You know, at its core, this is a story about a massive betrayal. It all started with this promise of healing, a promise made by the US government to a really vulnerable community. But here's the thing. That promise? It was a complete lie, designed to hide a horrifying truth. So the big questions here aren't just what happened, but how on earth was something like this allowed to go on for 4 decades? In this explainer, we're going to break it down. We'll look at the hard facts of the study, the ethical reckoning that came after, and the complicated legacy that we're still dealing with today. Okay, so to really get the impact, we have to start with the deception itself. This wasn't just one bad decision. It was a whole chain of choices made over 40 long years. All right, let's get into the details. It's 1932. The U.S. Public Health Service goes to Macon County, Alabama, and enrolls 600 black men. Now, 399 of them had syphilis, and they were brought into the study with a promise: free medical care for something they called bad blood. This was kind of a local catch-all term for all sorts of sicknesses, and the researchers totally exploited that. But the most crucial part? The men were never told they had syphilis, and they were certainly never told the real reason for the study. This really lays out the betrayal in black and white. On one side, you have the promise, right? Care from a trusted doctor, healing. And on the other side, the reality is just horrifying. The men were told they were getting special free treatments. But what were those treatments? Painful spinal taps that had zero therapeutic value. They were just for collecting data. The promise of care was just a cover for the study's real goal: to watch what untreated syphilis does to the human body, and to actively stop these men from ever getting a cure. Look at this timeline. It really shows you just how long this went on. The study kicks off in 1932. But then, by the mid-1940s, a miracle cure comes along: penicillin. It's the standard effective treatment for syphilis. So what did the Public Health Service do? Did they treat the man and end the study? No, they doubled down. They actually went out of their way to prevent the men from getting treatment, even telling local draft boards to make sure these men didn't get the mandatory syphilis therapy during World War II. So this wasn't just neglect. It was active, intentional harm that just kept going year after year. And if you want to understand the mindset, just listen to this quote from one of their internal memos. They said that penicillin would interfere with the study's objectives. Think about that. A life-saving cure was seen as an interference. Patient well-being became a methodological inconvenience. It just shows you how completely these men were dehumanized. They weren't patients to be cared for. They were just data points in an experiment. So after 4 decades of this happening in the shadows, the truth finally came out. And it forced the entire country to confront what had been done in the name of science. And you know, the study didn't stop because someone inside had a change of heart. Nope. It ended because a guy named Peter Buxton, a former employee at the Public Health Service, tried to raise objections internally and got nowhere. So he did the only thing he could. He took the story to the press. And once it hit the papers in 1972, the public outrage was immediate and just massive. That public outrage really was a catalyst. It led directly to the system we have today for protecting people in research studies. First came the Belmont Report, which laid down 3 core ethical principles: respect for persons, beneficence, which basically means do no harm, and justice. And then came the Common Rule, which made it mandatory for all federally funded research to be overseen by what are called institutional review boards, or IRBs. These are basically independent ethics committees whose whole job is to prevent anything like Tuskegee from ever happening again. It took a while, but 25 years after the study was exposed, the U.S. government finally issued a formal apology. And this was a huge symbolic moment. President Clinton stood up and acknowledged that this wasn't just a few bad apples. It was a systemic failure. Generations of doctors, scientists, and administrators had let it happen. It was a public admission that the very institutions supposed to protect people's health had been turned into instruments of harm. But, you know, the story doesn't end with new rules and an apology. The deepest, most lasting damage was done to something that's way harder to fix: trust. The name Tuskegee became shorthand for medical betrayal. I mean, think about it. For a community that was already dealing with systemic racism in healthcare, this was the ultimate confirmation of their worst fears. This wasn't just some historical event. It created this deep, durable mistrust that has literally been passed down from parents to children through generations. So, okay, you might be asking, why does this historical mistrust still matter so much today? Because it's not just history. It has real, tangible consequences that are affecting public health right now. It's like a living, breathing part of why health outcomes are so unequal.
And we can actually measure these consequences. Study after study shows that people who know about Tuskegee are less likely to participate in clinical trials. And that makes it harder to develop drugs that work for everyone. It leads to real skepticism about public health advice, people delaying getting treatment for things that are preventable. It just makes existing health disparities even worse. The shadow of Tuskegee is long, and it's still contributing to unequal health outcomes to this day.
And that brings us to the final and maybe the most important piece of this whole story. Tuskegee isn't a closed chapter in a history book. It's a lens. It's a way we have to look at the ethical challenges we're facing right now and the ones that are coming tomorrow. One of the most chilling lessons from all this is a concept called the routinization of harm. The idea is that this massive ethical failure didn't require every single person involved to be some kind of monster. Instead, the responsibility was just diffused. It was spread so thin across different committees, endless paperwork, and official protocols that individuals could just tell themselves they were doing their job. And it's that diffusion of moral responsibility that allowed an absolute atrocity to continue in plain sight for 40 years. And that lesson is so incredibly relevant right now. I mean, we're entering this whole new world of big data, AI in healthcare, genomics, and with it come new power imbalances. The questions we're asking today about consent, about who owns our data, about bias and algorithms, these are the modern echoes of the ethical failures that happened at Tuskegee. So when you boil it all down, the lessons here are structural. Tuskegee teaches us that good ethics isn't just about hoping for good people. It's about designing systems that prevent harm and demand accountability. It proves that you don't get trust back with a single apology. It has to be built slowly through actions that people can see. And maybe most of all, it screams that scientific progress can never, ever be separated from basic human dignity. Look, the story of Tuskegee isn't just a history lesson. It's a permanent warning. It leaves us with this fundamental question that every single generation has to answer for itself, especially now with technology moving so fast. As our ability to collect data explodes, how do we make sure we build the ethical frameworks to ensure that our commitment to human dignity doesn't just keep pace, but actually leads the way?